It's my pleasure to introduce the Honourable David Andrew Elliott. Briefly, David, you served, rising to the rank of captain, although I think it should be much higher, in the Australian Army, and so does the Minister.
It was the greatest injustice since Breaker Morant.
Subsequently, you were elected to the New South Wales Parliament as the member for Baulkham Hills. You're currently serving as the Minister for Police and Emergency Services. Are you anti-terrorism too?
Not anymore.
In 1999, you agreed to serve in the crucial position of the National Campaign Director of Australians for Constitutional Monarchy. This was to direct the campaign to defeat the referendum to turn Australia into what was named a politician's republic. And thank you, Nick, for finally citing the source, which was the gentleman from Melbourne, wasn't it? Rick Brown, yes. Excellent director of ACM in Melbourne, of solid DLP origins. We were opposed by most of the politicians. I worked it out at 2/3 of the politicians, and of the rest, most of them kept their heads well below the parapet. Celebrities, the elites, and the mainstream media. David, why did you, in the light of that, why did you agree to become National Campaign Director?
Well, it was an issue that I was very passionate about. I mean, I had served in the army before and after the referendum. I had a degree in modern history. I came from a conservative working class background who had a great deal of respect for the institution, and I, to be honest, it's like young men do a lot of things. It was a sense of adventure.
The engine room of the campaign was the daily 7 o'clock meeting, which you attended. And I think you were absolutely crucial for that, because you then worked with the states and the Vote No Committee, which was a separate entity, which had 2 Republicans on it. You worked with other bodies, including you had some liaison with the other allies. And one of our colleagues in ACM, Fong Van, described that meeting as the central command, with your job being to get to the troops on the ground, and that they were about 55 to 60,000 workers. And I think that that machine worked very well. It worked superbly. We didn't have any problems of any significance, and the result was absolutely superb. So how did you do that?
Well, when I arrived in the March to take up the role as National Campaign Director, I met with the state campaign managers, all of which I think bar Tasmania had been appointed. With the exception of Victoria, we all decided that we would establish the campaign on federal electorate boundaries. So I then went and spent a couple of months finding campaign managers in every single federal electorate, reaching out via all of the other like-minded organisation, whether it be Fred Nile, whether it be the RSL, whether it be the National Party or parts of the Liberal Party, even a couple in the Labor Party, whether it be Country Women's Association. So we gathered in each federal electorate all of the like-minded organisations, and they essentially staged campaigns in their area. So there was a core group per federal electorate which would be responsible for monitoring the media, for responding to media campaign, letters to the editor. They would sometimes be a local spokesperson. Then we would we mounted it up to the final campaign day, where the federal campaign directors for each federal seat would be responsible for manning the booths.
What did you do in Victoria?
Victoria, Rick decided that he wanted to run it on state electorates, which, given that he won what we thought, as Nick has just said to me, we thought would be the only state we would lost, given we won it. I think that worked.
That's interesting. In some of the media, and if you go back and check things, I found it also in the Encyclopedia Britannica. They said we lost Victoria.
Yeah.
They obviously looked at the early return.
Yeah, I'm forever correcting that, from various museums to documentation, academic documentation. I often read that we won every state bar Victoria, and I have to remind them that, as a matter of fact, we didn't.
What was your relationship to the Vote No committee?
Well, they were a government-funded committee, whereas we were a committee. ACM was privately funded through its membership, fundraising, and a little bit of corporate sponsorship. So I wasn't on the No Case committee. ACM's representative on that was Kerry Jones. The messaging was as similar as it possibly could be, but remember, from an ACN point of view, we had we were a little bit more robust.
How did you make sure that the messaging wasn't contradictory?
Well, that was my job at the 7 o'clock meeting, to make sure that it wasn't contradictory. And it never was. We were pretty consistent. But given it was for all intents and purposes, it was a negative campaign, it was okay for them to argue against the yes case in one matter and for me to argue against the yes case on any given day in another matter. Because they were government funded, they had a lot more rules when it came to how they would spend their money and certainly what they could say. Whereas we in ACM, we were able to push the envelope a lot more. We were allowed to use a lot more emotion, and I was able to make the debate a lot more robust than maybe the No Case would have done.
I mentioned this morning that John Singleton, who ran the Yes advertising campaign, I think it was the Yes, may have been the ARM advertising campaign, told me that he thought that putting us in a good alliance, I suppose, with the real Republicans on the Vote No committee would lead to an enormous spill, and it would create so much dissension that it would be seriously damaging to the No Case. He was very surprised that that didn't happen.
Yeah, well, he doesn't often get it wrong, Singleton, does he? But when it comes to referendums, and particularly when you're running a negative campaign, you only have to give everybody one reason to vote no. So my reason for voting no was different to Peter Reith's reason to vote no, which is different to Betty Bankstown's reasons to vote no. And so that's why, actually, to use a military term, our left and right of arc was much wider than the ARM. So we're allowed to capture a lot of people to ignite their decision, or to justify their decision to vote no, a lot more than the yes case could. And that was a great success for us.
I remember Kerry Jones and myself being uprated by coalition monarchists at a meeting in Canberra for the campaign theme, Vote No to the Politicians' Republic. Did you get that sort of reaction?
Oh, yeah. It was the only people that criticised me were actually the journalists, and it even came back when I was elected to Parliament. They said, I thought you didn't like politicians because that's why you didn't like the Republic, because it was a vote no to the Politicians' Republic. And I said all along, I have a lot of faith in politicians to make decisions on government, but they're not necessarily great leaders when it comes to the state, as in the state body.
One of the serious errors of the Republicans was to bring the flag in.
Yeah.
And at the Constitutional Convention, they actually invited people to go to a new flag seminar. The monarchists boycotted that occasion, and they produced, there was to be a travelling exhibition, and they produced a brochure with all these possible alternative flags, including one with expletive delete. It was just a white sign, white background, expletive deleted off to Fagland. And I remember that being used as a principle.
Well, when I say that we used the left and right of arc, when I say that we gave everybody a reason to vote no, that was one of the Republicans made such a tactical error by bringing in the flag into the debate, because the more Australians want to keep the flag than want to change the Constitution. So, and that was a significant tactical move. And then you had the Greens and certain sections of the left wing of the Labor Party were saying this Republic's going to be the first step, because then we're going to get into land rights, and we're going to get a Bill of Rights, and we're going to use this as a stepping stone to introduce a whole lot of social reform that had nothing to do with the change in our constitutional arrangements. And so it was great for us to be able to just go and point and say, see, there's another agenda, see, there's another agenda. And so that all fed in with our claim that it was a politicians' republic, because the politicians wanted to change it because they had hidden agendas, which did scare a lot of people.
I was asked by Kerry to write the first draft of the Vote No paper. That's the document that goes out to all voters with a Vote Yes page. And the pages are opposite one another, as you might remember. I decided that we should use all of our provision. I found out later the Republicans foolishly only used half of theirs. So when you got the booklet, halfway through, you suddenly found a lot of blank pages on the Republican side saying this argument finished at page such and such, which looked as though they didn't have many arguments. I decided also to use 10 arguments and to put them as best I could, this was the first draft, in more emotional and plain terms. What happened afterwards was there was an inquiry in the lower house about referendums in particular, and the Republicans, many of the Republicans, they didn't do it as Republicans, but many people made submissions to that committee that in future the size of the yes-no booklet should be half of the present size, that the cases should not be written by the people concerned or on behalf of them. There should be a neutral committee which would write the yes and no cases. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me, but that's people, bureaucrats and politicians wanting to manage the agenda.
So you were responsible for putting together the foot soldiers.
Yes.
I think that was absolutely a crucial thing. I had the impression, because I didn't have the inside running on it, but I had the impression that the ARM didn't have their own foot soldiers and that they phoned up the ALP or the unions to man their booths.
Yeah, there were a lot of campaigns. There were a lot of booths in a lot of areas around Western Sydney, around regional New South Wales, particularly northern Queensland, where they didn't have their booths manned because they were relying on the Labor Party and the union movement. And I remember one famous walkthrough by Kim Beazley in the lead up to the polling day, where he went to as a guest of one of the unions in Melbourne, he went to a construction site or a factory, and he said, vote for a Republic. And the union representative there said, mate, that's the last thing on our mind. You should be concentrating on workers' conditions. And that went lead story for the day, which was great. And I actually had, if you remember, I think it was the seat of Lindsay, the federal seat of Lindsay, the 2IC for the no case was actually the secretary of the local Labor Party branch. So there were a lot of people in the Labor movement that felt alienated by the campaign. And actually what we see in politics, and particularly in this state now, is actually a repeat of what happened in 99. I'm a politician, so I speak politics. We have in Western Sydney at the moment more Liberal seats than the Liberal Party has on the North Shore. And that is reflective of what happened, of the vote in 1999. Those conservative working class people that voted in Western Sydney, in the Hunter Valley and parts of regional New South Wales, who rejected the Republic because they thought it was elitist, they thought that they were being spoken down to, they thought that the campaign had hidden agendas. They're actually the same ones that voted for Scott Morrison earlier this year and Gladys Berejiklian, and you can pretty much. You could pretty much cover the same seats with the same results, and it's the same demographic.
Right. During the campaign, I was shocked to see in the city of Sydney, banners up saying vote yes, and they were put there along the streets by the City Council. Do you think city councils should have a role in using ratepayers' money to fund matters which are outside of their purview and are really federal matters or state matters?
Oh, I think a mayor, I won't criticise City of Sydney too much because there are other mayors around the country that use their resources to assist us, so I don't want to be accused of being hypocrisy.
No.
Being hypocrisy. But I think I think, that's up to the ratepayers. I think a mayor has a role to, much like a governor and a governor-general, to be the mirror for their community. So I think a mayor should probably has a legitimate place in public debate, social debate like that. In hindsight, and I can't remember how I felt at the time, but seeing what was going on in the city of Sydney, I don't think that it hurt us. I think Western Sydney commuters were coming into the city and they were seeing these bright government-sponsored City of Sydney banners telling them to do or say something, and they probably felt suspicious. They probably reinforced to them that this was a slick city campaign of inner city people that had an elitist attitude towards politics, and the Republican movement forgot that these retired High Court judges and these movie stars and these prominent media identities had exactly the same vote as my Lions Club president did.
You might remember on the night of the referendum results, we couldn't go to our usual place. That was the town hall. We had to go to the convention centre. The town hall wasn't booked, but booked out, but they still would not allow us to use the town hall on that night.
I don't remember much of the night. I think we celebrated a bit too. I think
Yes.
Brian made me drink a second bottle of champagne. It was awful.
ACM, I'm sure you were involved in this, developed a range of mottos, and we heard how the Vote No to the Politicians Republic came out. Those mottos, I think, had the advantage that they were always based on truth, and they were simple and they were very effective. I think that we had the edge on the models.
Yeah, I think we did. I mean, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think what we did well was we kept our message simple. We did encourage emotion into the debate because I think the history of constitutional monarchy, particularly in Commonwealth nations, is very emotive. I think at the time we had a lot of political instability around the world, which worked in our favour, and so the media was in many respects reminding people how important political stability was, and they were very reflective of that. They were receptive to that, and we didn't respond to the. I mean, there were some very, very loud yes advocates, but they were representing very small groups, and it would have been easy for us to be diverted and distracted into responding to a lot of those comments, but we didn't. I think our campaign was very, very disciplined. We knew what our message of the day was going to be, our message of the week was going to be, and if the Republicans threw up something like, some sort of campaign about why it was going to reduce unemployment, we didn't let that distract us. And of course, to borrow a phrase from John Howard, we always had confidence in the good sense of the Australian electorate, and they knew what was what needed a certain filter and what didn't.
And you had a particular experience in relation to Victoria. Do you think that the appointment of Rick Brown was the key there?
Now that he's won, yes. Yeah, listen, Rick was very reflective of the working class Victorian vote that we needed to attract, and I think that's why we won. Remember, it's a multicultural city, Melbourne. It was a state where a very large industrial class. And Rick reflected that, and I think that's the reason why we're able to win, because it's a very, very unique. You just had to look at the result of the last Victorian election, and it's a very unique political mindset down there. Whereas New South Wales is a very tribal state, so you've got to know the various tribes, whether it be Western Sydney, whether it be the Hunter Valley, whether it be west of the Great Divide, and if you're in Sydney, are you part of the NRL tribe, the News Limited tribe, are you part of the Union Movement tribe, or the Veterans tribe? I mean, you've got to be able to have tribes in New South Wales. Victoria was a little bit different.
Do you expect this question to be put again?
I can't see it, having just... I mean, I remember the day after the referendum I got asked, is it put to bed forever? And the Republicans were all saying, no, we're going to be back in 5 years' time. I think, and this is going to sound really rude, but I think the Republican movement failed dismally by appointing Peter Fitzsimons. For them to win, they had to get the Conservative Labor voters and the centre-right Liberals on board, and he just alienated them. Obviously, Malcolm's reputation in the mindset of the silent Australians hasn't helped the Republican movement. And I saw the success of the Invictus Games last year with Prince Harry's visit. So I will always advocate, and I always believe that there's a reason why so many people want to come and live in Australia. Australians know that. Therefore, they don't want to tinker with something as important as their constitution. I think Australians continue to look overseas at instability, and they're looking at Hong Kong right now, and they're looking at France right now, and seeing a whole lot of instability. And they look around and they see that government here is doing as best, I think, because they're Liberal governments, they're doing as best as we possibly can in maintaining community safety. And Australians, you know, even though we've got this notion of a healthy disrespect for authority, we actually have a healthy respect for our authoritarian institutions. And I think that's probably a reason why they will always default to the sovereign, to the Crown.
In Canberra, in the National Parliament, they have a Republican group. It's called Parliamentary Friends for an Australian Head of State, and it's cross-party.
Yes.
And the Republican movement claims that they have at least 60% support in the Parliament.
Yeah, but that hasn't changed in 20 years.
No, it was about two-thirds in 1999. Is there a similar group in the New South Wales?
I think they've
Parliament?
had functions here, but I put it this way, David, when I was handing out invitations to meet Prince Harry last year when he came for the Invictus Games, there were more people saying they wanted him to go. They wanted to go than there were that saying they would decline on grounds that they're Republicans. And in fact, the only requests I had when we were putting the program together to have Prince Harry go to certain electorates were from Republican Labor MPs. And they didn't get
among the parliamentary friends, people who come from both sides. Why one can understand with Labor now that it's in the platform, and it wasn't in the platform previously. One can understand that, but why would there be parliamentary friends from the Liberal Party?
You'd have to ask them. I mean, I won't criticise my own party, but John Howard was right when he said it's a broad church. The thing is, though, what I will say in the defence of the Republican Liberals, the Labor Party, when they're campaigning on the Republic, are very disrespectful. They use centuries-old sectarianism to justify their passion, but the Republicans in the Liberal Party don't hate the sovereign, they just want to change the sovereign. And there's one thing I'll say for my Liberal colleagues and National colleagues who are Republicans, some very prominent ones, including the Premier, they are extremely respectful. And I give credit to them. And I think that's going to hurt the Republican movement, because when you see a popular Premier like Will Hodgman or Gladys Berejiklian and being so respectful to the Crown and to members of the royal family, it's harder for them to justify an argument to change that, to change the institution.
I found during the referendum campaign, when I went visiting different groups, I found, for example, in Tasmania, that among the Constitutional Monarchist Committee, there were Greens. So this idea that because you belong to a political party, therefore you're a Republican, doesn't seem to hurt.
No, it doesn't. And I won't out this person, but there's a Green MP here who, in State Parliament, who has quietly and nervously admitted to me that they are a constitutional monarchist.
Just a final question. Do you think that the policy of preceding a referendum with a plebiscite or plebiscites is an admission of failure?
I think that it's sloppy, and I think that it's dangerous. I think it's it's not a referendum on same-sex marriage. It's a referendum changing the constitution. It's not a referendum on legislation where it's a referendum on changing the constitution. It's a enshrined requirement for changing our constitution. So I don't know what anybody thinks the status of a plebiscite before a referendum has. So I think that it's dangerous, and I would argue against it. And you know, I dare the Republicans in this place all the time. Bring it on tomorrow. They very rarely talk about it.
Well, your colleague Alistair Hanskins is going to present a paper on the constitutionality of such a plebiscite.
He's a wise man, senior counsel. You'll be paying him by the word, I'm sure.
Good. Well, I had suspected, but I hadn't fully appreciated your role in building up the grassroots at the time of the campaign, which is a crucial role because you must in Australia have people at the booths, you must have people campaigning, and that was very effective. And that daily interaction between the engine room and going down to the grassroots was absolutely essential. So Kerry Jones can't be here today, but it's very interesting to hear from you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.